Hey everybody, it's Hummingbird027 here. Today is July 5th, 2012, and I just got some pretty interesting news from the coop. I also found some other information. I'm going to be putting this as a breaking news, hoping that it will upload to YouTube and it won't be copyright infringed. If not, I'm going to add this to my WordPress and do another video and refer to it so everybody can watch this. It's going to be a breaking news article. So here's the video. If you will just subscribe to the coop, he's on top of it, guys. U.S. will sign gun control treaty on July 22nd. And I know you can't read this, but it says breaking prophetic news, UN arms treaty. So I'm going to let you watch a little bit of this video here, and then I have some other stuff to get to as well.
Everyone, Blaine Cooper here. I did a report yesterday telling you how the UN is getting ready to sign a treaty with 193 countries in New York City to regulate the world gun supply. This basically gives the UN powers to sanction U.S. companies if they don't comply with their rules. This is basically them attacking the Second Amendment. This is their way of doing it. Their argument is they want to keep it out of terrorist hands. You guys, this is a historic time in history. We need to stand up and go to New York City where this is happening and speak out. The many as you can round up. I don't know what else to do but report on it because mainstream media is not talking about this. I cannot believe that this isn't getting millions of hits because this is very, very bad, guys. If they get our guns, there is nothing left.
And there will literally be nothing left, folks. We are not sheep being led to the slaughter. We are Americans, and we are supposed to defend our country from tyrannical beings. God's on our side, folks. It's time to get woken up. Start praying if you can't do anything else. Pray for this country.
As the United Nations is now considering at this moment a global arms treaty that would curtail certain gun sales. Right now, the UN is working on a plan that would put a whole new set of international gun rules in place. Supporters, including the Obama administration, argue it will make the world more secure by tamping down on weapons commonly used by gangs and terrorists. But critics fear it would infringe on the Second Amendment right to bear arms right here in the United States. Larry Pratt is the executive director of Gun Owners of America, and KT McFarland is a Fox News national security analyst. Larry, let me start with you on this, because the human rights groups have convinced the Obama administration to sort of reverse what had been U.S. policy when it comes to this proposed treaty, and to go into the United Nations and support it, because they argue that human rights violations nationwide, or worldwide, are the result in part of some very bad guys getting their hands on some guns, and we need to have more regulation of international gun sales. How does that affect the Second Amendment right here at home?
Well, it would completely work against what the Second Amendment is intended to do, but it doesn't seem that the Constitution is much of an obstacle or a problem for this administration. But nevertheless, shall not be infringed is something that a treaty can't trump. The very language in the Constitution dealing with treaty making says that treaties have to be made under the authority of the United States. And if we, the people, haven't given authority for gun control to the United States, to the federal government, then its hands are tied. And at a practical level, I think even Harry Reid's Senate would look at that treaty if it's presented to them and say, this is toxic. I'm not going there in an election year.
The gun lobby has a lot of power, KT, a lot of power. Just look at once the NRA decided to score that Holder contempt vote, you had like 24 Democrats almost immediately come over the other side of the aisle. So these lawmakers do pay attention to what the gun lobby wants. It doesn't want this treaty. But why? I still fail to understand exactly how it's going to affect Americans and the Second Amendment, as opposed to, because the folks who are proposing this want us to believe that this is only an international thing that's going to stop genocide in other countries because we're going to take away their guns.
Look, everybody wants to stop genocide in other countries. That's not the point. Look at how capable has the United Nations been so far at stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. Iran has agreed to an international treaty, but we can't stop Iran. Iran's cheating. It's building a nuclear weapons program. We have no ability to enforce it. We can't even go and inspect what they're doing. So the idea that the United States would cede its national sovereignty to an international organization that's going to somehow verify and prevent every country in the world from running guns to other countries, it's just not going to happen. Why? Because the United States will abide by it the same way we abide by the international arms control agreements on the development of nuclear weapons. Who's not going to agree to it is countries like Iran. Is Iran going to really stop gun running to Hamas, to Syria? No. And so you'll be left with a world that's not safer. In fact, it will have the absolute opposite effect of what the intention is. It will make the world a much less safe place.
Larry, what do you think is really going on here then, since we've had a reversal in terms of, I guess, from the Bush administration to the Obama administration? Why? Is this a political issue, or why would the Obama administration be supporting this?
It reflects the incredibly strong ideological commitment to control in general, and guns in particular, of this administration. What they're seeking is not going to be ratified by a Senate, but what I suspect they will try to do, because we've seen it in other areas of federal governing, is declare that whatever it might be, registration, prohibition of certain calibers of firearms, they'll just try to put that into effect administratively, even though they have no authority. That hasn't stopped them anywhere else where they've wanted to go.
KT, the UN agreement, the treaty, if it is accepted, would hold nations accountable through legally binding rules. Countries that sign it are going to have to pass laws to ensure that the weapons companies here in the United States, for example, abide by this treaty. So could you have American gun manufacturers being cited for non-compliance by the United Nations? Is there a conflict there between the potential treaty and the Second Amendment?
Well, absolutely. United States laws remain supreme in the United States. Our laws are not secondary to international laws, to UN laws. And then you would have a situation where the United Nations is looking at American domestic gun manufacturers and sanctioning them. Again, go back and look at how successful the United Nations has been in any time they've done this sort of thing. The other thing I would say is, look at how incompetent the United States has been controlling weapons. Look at Fast and Furious. We couldn't even keep track of those guns. We somehow expect the United Nations is going to keep track of hundreds of thousands, millions of firearms, and assume that there's there's no enforcement mechanism, even if it were a good idea.
Larry Pratt, KT.
This article is coming out of the National Global Arms Trade Treaty gets underway. The United Nations is calling it a disgrace that there is no international agreement regulating global arms sales. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon yesterday opened a month-long conference that aims to negotiate one to curb black markets and deny weapons to repressive regimes, terrorists, and nations at war. It's ambitious, but I believe it is achievable, Mr. Ban told the delegates in New York, representing more than 150 countries. Our common goal is clear. Such unregulated weapons kills 1,500 people each day, up to 750,000 a year, according to Amnesty International USA. These are falsified statistics, folks. Look at the murderous regime of Assad and all of those people who have been killed. They are figured in to these statistics. They are falsified about little rebellions in little countries and stuff. Folks, they are trying to get our rights away from us. The bestial system is coming into play. If you don't know Yeshua right now, Lord Jesus Christ, you better get to know him right now. The proposed arms trade treaty in the works for 6 years requires 65 nations to ratify it before it is legally binding in those countries. It would cover all conventional weapons, from small arms to tanks, warships, and missile systems. It would require ratifying countries to regulate imports exports and weapons passing through their territories. Countries would have to publish their sales yearly and register arms brokers according to the draft treaty. Unlike the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which created the IAEA to enforce it, which they don't do anything really to enforce anything, no country wants a treaty that creates an international arms regulatory agency to enforce it. Instead, nations should determine which buyers are rights abusers and eligible for arms sales and which are not, the draft treaty says. This would allow the U.S., for instance, to continue selling arms to Israel and Russia to continue supplying Syria. It would also allow the GCC countries, which have taken a low profile leading up to the conference, to arm the Syrian rebels, for example. The treaty asks countries to decide on sales based on certain criteria. Arms deals contributing to human rights violations, including terrorism, genocide, or other war crimes, should not be authorized. Other criteria include whether arms would undermine peace or prolong a conflict, be diverted to the black market, hurt the economy for the purchasing nation, or if the sale involved corruption. We want a golden rule telling governments that arms transfers under consideration would be subject to a rigorous risk assessment, and if there is a substantial risk that the arms are likely to be used for serious violations of international human rights law, then those transfers would not be permitted. Tom Countryman, an assistant secretary of state and the chief U.S. delegate, said it would compel countries that had no regulatory system to put one in place. Only 52 countries regulate their arms sales. Treaty opponents believe that creating national regulations in countries where they do not exist could close loopholes in the international system that rogue arm dealers have exploited for years. Analysts say this could lead to naming and shaming countries that violate the treaty, but there is a little in the draft to prevent governments from falsifying their records unless another nation complains. While the necessary 65 countries were expected to approve a version of the treaty by the month's end, there are several nations that remain skeptical. African nations are deeply uncomfortable about revealing information about their weapons purchases, but seeing the havoc that conventional arms have wrought on the continent, African nations want greater control of their imports. China initially was skeptical but has come around since their African trading partners said they favored greater regulation. Who in their right mind would ever favor greater regulation? More laws, more taxes, more this, more that. Okay? This is just big government stamping all over anyone that they want. Other countries said to be skeptical of the treaty are net importers: Egypt, Sudan, and Russia. The UAE mission to the UN did not return a phone call seeking comment because basically they're trying to arm themselves with nuclear weapons at this point. The conference began 2 days ago after a diplomatic row over whether the Palestine territories could be ceded with other voting states. After the U.S. and Israel threatened to boycott the conference, a compromise was reached to have the Palestinian delegate sit in the front row as an observer without voting rights. Folks, this is getting intense. Right there says it all. That is screaming to us that the Antichrist, the beast, is about ready to rise on the world scene. Make this video viral. Republish it. Get it out there. Let people know what's going on.